I am Adam Weil, partner at White Rabbit Group. Welcome to the Pixel Perfect Podcast, where we share knowledge, experiences, and motivations from creatives and entrepreneurs. Super excited. We got Dave Miller on the podcast today. For those of you who don't know, Dave Miller started Design Citizen, which is a talent and recruiting agency, as well as a coaching group, which he can talk a little bit more about. I know Dave through our network. We work, with hundreds of different agencies and designers. And so Dave was recommended it to us by one of the best agencies that we work with. And I've had a chance to get to know him over the years and see some of the groups that he's worked with. And, honestly, there's a million different recruitment companies out there. And I really put Dave, not just because he's on the show here, but I truly think Dave is in that elite tier when it comes to recruiting the best of the best. I mean, world-class designers and leaders and executives in that space. Like, that's his entire world. That's his entire community. So really excited to bring him on here and just talk a little bit about the design industry, where things are at, where things are going, and what designers can do to really get ahead of all of this AI and just the different trends that are happening, and make sure they stay relevant and ahead of those sort of things. So Dave, really excited to have you on.
Thank you, Adam. And right back at you. Anytime I'm talking with design organizations or groups, and at least a handful of times a year, they'll ask like, hey, we need a development partner. And I'm like, you got to check out White Rabbit. And they always say the work is fantastic, but the designer in me, I just love your brand. I love the site. I love the interactivity on it. So yeah, I'm so glad that you reached out and had me on the show.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate the love. Let's talk about kind of where things are at. I'm really excited to specifically dive into like education and what we can do to sort of stay ahead of all this change that's happening right now. But first, can you maybe set the stage? Like, where's the industry at right now? It's May 21st, 2025. How do things look out there?
It looks weird out there. And it's been weird for a couple years. I think 2025 is different than 2023 and 2024 for different reasons. But, my overview here is design after the Great Recession, kind of loosening up in 2013, 2014, was essentially full speed ahead for the last decade. Even during 2020, where there was maybe a temporary pause in COVID, by the late fall of that year, like, hiring was back. And we saw a massive growth, especially in 2021, 2022. I actually launched my company in 2020. And it came on the heels of a layoff that I was part of at a design and innovation firm here in Seattle that I love. I still love. My favorite job ever. And but consultancies, I think, got hit in a different way. But anyways, I launched the company, and after that first year, my wife was like, "Why didn't you do this earlier?" And I said, "Don't worry, love. The pendulum will swing." And it did. But 2021, 2022, amazing. Into 2022, and then especially like 2023 was really tough for the profession of design. We saw a ton of layoffs, especially in the tech sector, affecting design, especially affecting design leadership, design research and strategy. And then our early career professionals that were graduating from school, just trying to get in. There's a lot of people that were lost in that mix. I think a big part of that was AI and emerging technology. I don't think we knew it at the time at the end of 2022 or beginning of 2023, because ChatGPT hadn't dropped like massively in the way that was about to, in the spring of 2023, if I remember correctly. So in hindsight, I was like, oh, tech knew what was about to drop and what was about to come, and we're essentially shoring up resources to figure out what horse they wanted in that race. And I think that affected design in the sense that, there was a slide backwards. for us, especially when they went for design leadership roles and kind of eliminated
Mm,
layers of management in design, or reorged design, and under technology or under engineering or product, rather than maybe reporting up to VP, senior VP, chief of design.
mm,
And we saw kind of a return to 2007-ish, where it was super nimble, um, and not a lot of fat on the bones,
mm,
and the mantra turned back into, hey, how much can we do with less?
mm,
And really pushing those bounds. And so even before um, this kind of mass layoff of 2023,
mhm,
I had been talking with a lot of designers who were feeling burned out, and a bit uninspired.
mm,
Um, and then 2023 happens, and those that remain gainfully employed were still in a tough spot, because now they were doing even more. So the burnout was even more. There's the emotional exhaustion of losing your teammates. Um, they're now potentially doing their boss's job, and not really much pay extra,
mm,
just more responsibility. But at the same time, all of a sudden, they're more grateful for the job. They realize, like, well,
mm.
what am I going to do? Where am I going to go?
Right.
Um, it's not like I'm looking on LinkedIn or Indeed and see a million, roles that I'm super interested in. And even if I do, there's 2,000 applicants in there after a week. Do I even shoot my shot? Um,
Mm,
I think 2025 is a little bit different, though. I think there's the dust will never settle in the AI automation race. Literally, like, every year is going to be a new year for as long as I'm on the planet,
mhm.
and that's exciting and frightening, when I look at my own job security, and what's going to replace me.
Yeah, yeah. Let me throw a question in there. I would say a lot of designers are feeling a little bit like not sure where things are going right now. They
Mhm.
don't. They're feeling the same way, right? Is my job at risk? Um, and so, what do you say to them? The people that are maybe feeling a little bit discouraged. How can they prepare for kind of what's ahead? It sounds like there's never like one thing that's coming up. It's always going to be changing, like what you're saying.
Mhm.
So how do they build a habit of like continuously learning?
Yeah, and I think jobs are at risk. Um, Anytime immense change is happening, that's just a fact. Honestly, even in good times, where you think there's no risk. We don't have to go back far. Like mid 2022, designers were used to having recruiters in their inbox often. They could really play the field, they could play the market. There was definitely a sense of almost, impenetrable
Hmm.
strength. Like, I can go anywhere, I can do anything. And then that rug was pulled right out from underneath us.
Mm,
And so, from an emerging technology standpoint, it's funny. The ones that were laid off, or are underemployed right now, or looking for what's next, that aren't necessarily gainfully employed, they're actually in a bit of a unique opportunity to experiment with these emerging tools.
mm,
Whereas, if you're in a design group, um, working on a particular product or program, um, uh, and it's busy and you're scaling it, even though AI is a part of the conversation as far as the tooling that we're using to actually do the work, and then the
mhm.
conversation around, like, how might that affect what the people are using, and what we're actually building, and how you know
Right.
what the offering is of the product. Um, there's still not a lot of time to necessarily focus on it unless it's your job.
Totally.
Um, and so, um, in some ways, you're aware that all this is happening, you're gainfully employed, and yet you're like, I don't even have time to get to this, or this isn't being introduced into the team.
Yeah,
I think the
100%.
teams are fragmented too, like designers are using their own tools, but are they sharing that out in a bigger conversation of like how they're hacking through it, and what they're learning and what they're discovering? And I think a lot of the times the answer is kind of or no. There can be Slack channel conversations, there can be
Mm.
digital water cooler conversations, but as far as kind of a dedicated white space for people to be like, all right, like what are the tools, how are we using them, let's all get on the same page, like
Right.
let's grow together.
I
I don't
feel
think
like
that's, yeah.
I'm like craving. I like want a vacation just so I can work, if that makes sense. I just want to like learn it all because it's so crazy. There's all this stuff, and yeah, you're right. You don't have enough time to really absorb it all.
Yeah.
But I feel like we got to bake some of that into our daily practice or weekly practice on some level because it's like, and even the companies I think should almost take the initiative because I and you can I love your take on this because the wisdom article that you wrote is really interesting and really made me kind of pause on my perception of the landscape. Iterating is not always progress, something you talk about. And so my thought is that if we can just have a little bit more time, a little more white space for playing with some of these tools, there's so much ROI that can be gained there, more so than if you were to like an hour of studying stuff today versus 3 years ago. I think there might be more ROI in that studying output, right? Um, and so maybe it's worth it for companies to say, hey, we want you to spend a little bit more time on that, just a little bit less time on the billable hours because it'll actually pay for itself in the long run. Um, that's just kind of a gut feeling, but I don't know. I don't really see that happening.
Yeah, it's I 100% agree. My favorite environments that I've been in before in the past had, that 80/20, where there was a dedicated 10 to 20% of the job that was to the white space, or blue sky, or just experimental thinking or tooling.
Right.
Um, and those were design-led companies, with a designer CEO.
Hmm.
And for it to work in some ways, like you have to have true buy-in and commitment at a senior level to even make that space.
Hmm.
Um, and one of the ways that that space was accountable is that people reported out on it. There were the weekly company or team meetings, as a design organization. Um, and at any given time, in a crew of 50 or 60 people, there was always a couple that were that had bandwidth to go and experiment, and then they had to package up that experiment, and present it to a team like a case study.
Right.
And so it felt a bit like, I don't know, academic environment on some level. It was encouraged. It was part of the ethos of the company. It's why people would come there.
Hmm.
Um, I think I think people feel so crunched anyways. They're, like I said, doing more with less, that baking in that space. And if they lost kind of the senior strategic design layer at the highest level, you don't have the same advocacy for it. Um,
Hmm.
I'm seeing several independent consultant design leaders who are essentially they're in the beginning stages of packaging this up as a consulting offering to
Hmm.
companies, where it's like, hey, we know you don't have the time to think about it, even though you are thinking about it. We know that you're experimenting, but you're probably not sharing it out. Even
Hmm.
if you're sharing it out with design, you're likely not including product or engineering.
Hmm.
So how do we get everybody in the room and just kind of understand the tools available to us right now, and then work as pods for a couple-day workshop of solving some sort of prompt together, and that way if design is throwing things over the fence to engineering or vice versa, or over to product, we're at least all working in the same tools and we understand where we're coming from.
Mm,
On a bigger level, it also serves as like if companies invest in that. And I don't have that offering. I'm just really interested in it. I support it, and I see these people that are manufacturing these offerings, but they're still struggling to sell it in. It's almost similar business format as when you know IDEO started selling in design thinking, and then by proxy, design thinking spread through design, and then we were selling kind of as a
right.
whole design thinking. And so this is some sort of mini version of same
Mm,
format, but different discussion
mm,
on tooling and technology and how we collaboratively work together.
right.
Um,
Yeah, it's like we
yeah.
just haven't seen those use cases kind of play out yet, like we have with design thinking, where it was sort of proven, and then everyone goes, "Oh, we should adopt that." Or like, I think about this is maybe separate, but how Google had like those sort of incubation, like I think that's how Google Maps started, or maybe
Yeah.
Chrome. They were just kind of tinkering and doing these things, and then companies are like, "Oh, wow, okay, well maybe we should do something, similar." It's just still so early for those use cases to get built out, but I feel like they're just inevitable with all the
Yeah.
advantages of the tools that exist now.
I mean, Google is a whole different, beast, obviously outside looking in. I mean, I know like in DeepMind, for example, subsidiary of Google, they're working on this technology, um, and they might think they know what they're designing it for, who they're designing it for, what it will actually do. They got the added benefit of having, um, tens and tens of thousands of people within Google and different teams where they can kind of showcase like, hey, this is what we think this is and what it might do.
Mm,
And any number of those teams can be like, ooh, that exists. Actually, you're thinking about it all wrong. Like it could do this for
mm,
us. And so they can find so many use cases, and it's just kind of like in a good way, I think a nice little wildfire of spreading of ideas and iteration. Is it innovation yet? Who knows? It depends on, like I said
mm,
in the article, like what does it do? What does it serve?
mm,
But it's such a, I think, beautiful environment for these ideas to take off. I think investing in either these one person workshop consultants that are coming in to initiate the conversation and do some experiments. Um, values everybody's time. It's not another task that you're putting on a design lead or director or whoever it might be to initiate this.
mm,
So it gives it some sort of curriculum or format that's already thought out and brought in,
mm,
and so it's low stakes in that case. I think it offers from an employee brand standpoint, like internally, it's offering something that the design community wants internally that might not have time, and so it's kind of a nod to like, hey, thank you, employer,
mm,
for recognizing this and bringing this in. And then from a collaboration standpoint of breaking down some of the barriers between product and engineering and
mm,
design, and getting people talking and understanding and having a shared language. Even though, a year from now, all the tools that they might be using could be, flipped, and a whole new
right.
crop could be there, or some clearly emerge, and
Mm,
even when designers are thinking about what's next, I think that's a part that's on their mind is if they're interviewing, they're getting asked about it. And it's kind of like, well, no, not exactly. I haven't been in that space.
mm,
Which I think is the wrong answer, even if it's the true answer.
mm.
Um,
What's the right one?
like the right one is that that's an invitation for, at the very least, a philosophical and belief conversation. Um, like if you've never touched it, then, or if you've never touched it professionally, like I'd find it hard that you haven't. been on one of the GPT models, and or LLMs, messing around with it. But um, one, don't wait for the company to initiate it. Like you should be using all the plugins and tech that's allowed to be downloaded on your computer, and you should be figuring out at least for yourself, like how's my workflow going to evolve? How's my process going to evolve? How can I do more faster, a certain bar of quality? Um, I think for myself, speaking for myself, and some others that I've talked to, this has kind of unleashed a new level of creativity for them,
Mm,
especially around stuff that was super production heavy, where it's like
mm,
oh, I'm about to be in this part of the development process, and this is going to take X amount of time. Now it's like, oh, actually, I can automate that. There's actually a level of creativity to
mm,
how I automate that,
mm.
and become the conductor of this part rather than the production artist. Um, and I'm super happy with the results. Or even it broke new barriers of thinking, a new direction for me, and
Mhm.
ignited my creativity or strategic thinking. And I don't want to oversell it. Sometimes that's just to a degree, but I
Sure.
feel it personally for myself, where I'm like, oh my gosh, a part of my role that just is so painful at this
Yeah.
point in my career has become fun again.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. The amplification of someone's skill set. It's almost like if you were, back in the day writing with an ink pen, like a fountain ink pen, you had to really take your time. Your mind is probably just racing with ideas, but now you can just type and just unload. Or now you can even speak into a voice recorder and have it transcribed. So it's like technology is definitely it's such a powerful tool. It's undeniable. But what I love about some of the content you put out is the philosophical side of things, and I feel like we're kind of getting away from that a little bit, because it's like so much focus on like what's new and what's hot and what's flashy, um, and it's especially heightened right now because the AI stuff in a lot of ways feels like magic. So it's
mhm.
incredible, but you know, it's there's still like core fundamentals of like design and I don't know. I don't feel like that gets enough attention. And I'm just curious from your perspective, do you feel like there's something about the way the industry is or the way that designers are thinking that philosophically you just don't quite think they're on the right track about? And is there anything there for you?
I think philosophically, the world is relative, and we're always doing it the way we should be doing it, even if it seems like we shouldn't be doing it that way. So
Mm,
this in this moment in time where we're in this kind of almost production oriented environment of like, hey, let's produce. Like, how fast can we produce? By the way, we're in the space race, essentially on AI and emerging technology. We got to get there first, you know. And the human centered thinking and design thinking and outcomes focused thinking and finding the north star and working backwards, and things that I think have a more philosophic intention, um, and meticulous approach, like kind of feel thrown out the window,
mm-hmm.
yeah, we might destroy the world and Terminator, one reality comes into play, and but we, like, maybe it won't. Like, let's just get there first, and then we'll figure out how to save it in the future. Um, but I would argue that we need those times of gosh, what would I call it? Where we're not overthinking. I'm not advising, like, I am worried about like the ethical and uh, the destruction or change that could happen, the apocalypse of new technology.
Yeah.
Um, but I see the value of that thinking kind of needs destruction and intention operate off of each other. They play
Mm,
off of each other, I think. And so we have to run headfirst, into over a cliff sometimes to realize to bring an era of intention back in.
mm,
And so it's cyclical, and I think we've seen this throughout the dawn of time, at least on a human level.
mm,
And so I don't know how long this will last, as
mm,
far as just maybe undervaluing design,
mm,
or maybe there's the perceived like, design's going to slow us down, they're going to get high and mighty or ethical on us, and
mm,
like we don't want to be policed. Like
mm,
let's just run as fast as we can, like head on into the darkness and see where we end up.
mm,
But um but yeah, I think we need times like that for intention. If we
mm,
were just completely balanced all the time, um, we might not have the spark, needed to ignite something new.
mm.
Um,
That makes sense. So it's sort of like expansion and contraction, or it's just this cyclical nature. And right now, it sounds like we maybe have to run a little bit before we slow down.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's you'll hear people from an AI perspective. I wrote about it in the 20 what's design look like 2025 to 2040, and I was talking about how disciplines start to just converge, and dissolve, especially between product design and engineering. And I think if you ask anybody, they can say like, "Hey, wow, I'm so much more than I was last year if I've been working with these tools. Like I've expanded my own skill set." But as far as what I do at my core, well, you can't replace that. Like you'll always need some version of me there.
Mm,
But any of those peripheral skill sets that you've been collecting through AI over the last year, each of those skill sets has a domain expert as well, just like you're your domain expert. And they'll tell you the same thing of like, oh, and I've expanded too. But
mm,
you can't take what I do and just
mm,
replace it with AI.
mm,
And so I think right now we're experimenting with that concept of like, oh, can we kind of be everything for everyone to a degree, and not really knowing the line of where the craftsmanship completely breaks and dissolves,
mm,
or not being self-aware enough yet. And so that from a company or employer standpoint can maybe look for a moment in time of like, oh, we don't need as many people. Like one person can now be three people.
mm,
Or do the designer can be the researcher and strategist,
mm,
and actually, because stuff is automated, they can also be their own program manager.
mm,
And I think we'll have to see where that goes, and then eventually it breaks, and then that's when a time of intention swings back in. It's like, you
mm,
know what? Actually, we now see the value of that true deep research and strategy person leading research and strategy, still using AI and
mm,
automation, maybe not as many of them, but
mhm,
for us to just have the designer also be that person,
mm,
um, might have harmed us,
mm.
or allow another company to beat us to the punch.
Right, right, right. It's almost like, yeah, kind of going back to the cycles of things. I remember, 20 years ago, it was like there was a web designer. If you were a web designer, you were kind of like a researcher, a UI designer, and a UX designer. And then all of a sudden over time, it was like, no, we're going to have a specialized individual to do the UX and a specialized individual to do the UI and research. And now it seems like it's kind of blending back together, like what you're saying. And we just got to go through that cycle again to then identify, all right, where can some of those sort of maybe meld together? I assume it's not going to go back to just
Mhm.
having those individual roles again. There's probably going to be some combination, but we don't know what that exactly is yet. And maybe there's some new discipline or of some sort because of technology with AR and VR. I mean, who knows, right? But it definitely feels so weird to bring it back to your first statement at the beginning of the call, right? It's like it's so weird right now, but we got to keep our head on a swivel. It feels like.
Yeah, and I think for you know continuing to educate ourselves or grow, or I mean, it comes down into at the very least, self-initiated experimentation. Um, in fact, even before that, like little things you can do even before experimentation, if you're not feeling like you have the time in the day outside of what your team might already be currently doing, or if you're underemployed or not employed.
Mm.
Um, it starts with consuming um, literature and media on the subject.
Mm.
It should be the podcast that you're listening to, or the Audible book, or um, the YouTube rabbit holes,
Mm.
um, evolving into, hey, I want to do something. And then finding what technology is available and experimenting with it. I'll give you an example. I have a client that wants me to essentially train their small studio on hiring, and put together like the hiring ethos, the hiring process, and um, and uh, and have them be an extension of the company's brand, so that they're representing the brand well, and that they're attracting great talent, and that they're able to close and onboard that talent that they want. And and I was thinking like, okay, is this like is this a PowerPoint? You know,
Mm.
um, really? Like, no, I know it's not. Is this some wiki article database that can kind of evolve and change? Like, God, that sounds so boring. Like I tune out all those, and those could be traditional formats that I would have used,
Mm-hmm.
that were in my wheelhouse and capabilities. But I'm like, why not actually design something that a curriculum people might actually enjoy, they
Mm.
might listen to. And I don't, I'm a team of 3 here at Design Citizen, and we're busy working with a lot of different clients. And so, what could this be? And so, designers could hate me for this, but part of me was like, well, maybe this is 2-minute video intros, to set the stage. And then I'm like, I hate being on camera,
Mm.
and I hate the editing process. Hate's a strong word. I like it, but I'm not super skilled at it. Um, and then it's like, well, no, maybe this is an animated character,
Mm.
and what would that look like? And so now all of a sudden I'm going into AI generated animation characters, AI generated voice, like I'm taking my script and putting it in. How would this look? And it passes,
Mm.
like it passes the test, where I'm like, it could be better, but like, gosh, I would have never even messed with that. The reality is, I'm probably not even going to deliver it in this format. I'd probably end up hiring somebody that could essentially take what I've done and consider it a mood board, or a
Mhm.
storyboard, or like a wireframe. Like, hey, like it's kind of there, right? But the quality, I need to up the quality. Can you help me with
Mm.
this? And call in, the real designer to do it.
Mm.
But just the fact that that was an open door for me to explore, and that I
Mm.
got as far as I could with it,
Mhm.
and like geeked out and illuminated mind why I'm doing it, where I'm
Mm.
just like, oh my God, like hours disappeared from the day. And I was like, wait,
Right.
should I be spending my time on this right now? Like there's other things that I should like, in thinking about it at night, and just like, so
Mm.
I don't know where I'm going with that, but that's an example of basically like the opportunity presents itself. You could level up,
Yeah.
like fuck around a little
Right.
and mess around, see what happens, like exploring
Right.
the tool, and then share it with your team. So,
It's like another
um,
way to. It's just a amplification of our mind in a way, right? Like instead of just trying to explain things with words or maybe in a wiki or something like that, right? You can actually do something yourself to make it easier for someone else to understand and take the next step with it, right? To maybe hand it to that video person or that professional that can take it to the next stage. So it's easier for them to interpret.
that storytelling, which is overused word, but it's so relevant
Mm,
right now. How we're communicating um, is more important than it's ever been,
mm,
especially if we're going to automate a lot of our duties. Presenting, how you present, they're so important. I was uh, talking to a designer, and he was telling me that his kids going into college, this year, and like, what should he major in? Like
mm.
he was asking me, what should he major in? Like I don't know. Like I've got a 3.5-year-old. I'm so happy that like time, but we got time for some things to maybe figure themselves out or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, but ultimately, the kid ended up choosing a communications degree track.
Mm,
And like in hindsight, I've been thinking about it recently. And I was like, I think that's actually a really smart choice.
mm.
And specifically, communications, like wants to be a news anchor of some sort or a
Uh-huh.
broadcaster, broadcast communications.
Huh.
Which in a time of social media and people can have their own channel and be their own reporter, like A, that makes sense. But then B, even if that track doesn't work out, like those tools of communicating human relationship, articulating ideas, telling compelling stories, um, you know, uh, in a time where AI can write your entire paper, what that means for editors and journalists. But
Mm,
in some ways, like I think that ties right into, I mean, it does. It's the communications degree as well. Like
right.
the nuances behind that, in some ways, make them more qualified to pilot whatever we're building in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. Like, one of the comments you were talking about in one of the articles was, someone was saying, hey, I think the engineer, everything is going to meld together. And I think one thing you called out, which was not having the engineer sort of lead that, and I think that's going to be a really fun thing for me to kind of watch play out, because the engineers maybe at the forefront right now. It feels like they're leading the path and they're enabling all these other tools for designers and such. But if we're not there trying to get at the forefront with them, yeah, they can sort of continue to take the lead. And it's like, yeah, how can the storyteller, um, yeah, fight to make sure their voice is preserved?
Yeah, we can't sleep on it, because the engineers or the product teams will inevitably be like, "Oh, I'm a designer too," you know, like I'm a designer now. And honestly, design will do that with engineering and product. They'll be like, "Oh
Mm,
wow, my ability to prototype this, and
sure.
Health Figma's practically designing the whole thing for you, if you let it or wanted to." That's going to have really interesting implications.
That's true.
Again,
A
all
good
relative,
example
good or bad.
going back the other way. Yeah, you're right with like
Yeah.
Figma and Framer.
And so, and so, yeah, if if you're coming through academia and your track was design, or your track was engineering, you're technically more qualified to conduct your AI automations in that space. But um, as far as like employment goes for design to stay there, just know that it's not just AI that's coming for your job. It's your colleague on the other side of the aisle,
Mm,
not in a vindictive way, but just like, and not even in an opportunistic way, kind of accidentally is going to start tripping into your work,
mm,
and might like it.
mm,
And so the first to become everything, um,
mm.
even though there's the adage, you can't be everything for everyone. And I really, truly believe it.
Yeah.
I really, truly believe that.
Mm,
I'm a recruiter and coach for designers, like it's a very intentional thing. Um,
right.
don't get it confused, even though sometimes with my coaching, I'm like, oh, well, gosh, I could coach a healthcare analysts and CFO, and
Mm,
um, an
mm,
office manager. I should be able to coach anybody.
mm.
Um, but uh, but from a brand standpoint, like I'd spread myself thin. You wouldn't know what I am.
Right. Yeah, it's really
For
interesting.
now, design is still a real industry. So
Yeah, yeah.
I have a segment, but I feel it. I feel all these things just going gray and lines disappearing, and I think about it all the time with myself. What does that mean for me and my business?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the business side, I see some companies really pivoting hard into, becoming something else due to all this change. And one thing that we've seen over time, if you just zoom out, is those businesses that the last in the long haul, a lot of times they kind of stick to their lane. They stick to their guns and they emerge out of just the cultural changes as this highly reputable authority in that space. They weren't swayed into this or that. So, but I don't know exactly what that means. I mean, I'll tell you, for us, we're leaning heavily into AI assisted development today. That's, we're working on our new website, and it's like that's going to be on there, and
As you should.
with that, yeah, as we should, right?
I think that's the beauty of consulting right now, of a consultancy. In a time where consultancies have somewhat lost their place, specifically like the design and innovation consultancies, as far as just money trickling down from the larger companies. I think with your engineering and understanding of design and partnering with design, um, you're not as affected as the traditional design agency, where it's like, hey, let's go to these people to figure this out. But traditionally, a design agency or a design consultancy or engineering consultancy is the exact type of environment where people can experiment and are allowed to experiment and are
Right.
surrounded by really interesting talent internally.
Mm.
And then you look at your brand, even if the clients aren't asking for it, like that's the opportunity. It's like, well, you know what, we're going through a brand evolution, it'll be a new site, and if we're going to do it, like, let's do it for us. Let's do the type of thing that all of our clients will be like, oh shit, can you do that for us?
Right.
Like it kills two birds with one stone. You all increase your knowledge internally. You do something relevant, badass. You put it out in the world, and then you have people coming back to you and say, "Hey, do that for us," and
Right.
you just keep increasing the acumen around it, and that's really hard for a large corporation, mid to large corporation, to do.
Mm.
So, anyways, good on you.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see where you take it, but like that's
Yeah.
perfect. I could argue that exact thing that we're talking about for people's portfolios.
Mm.
It's the opportunity to, okay, you don't get it at your job, your project, you're not on it, but you're updating your brand, your personal and professional brand, the site that you're putting out in the world. Like, don't dust off the old site and just update it. Like it's a new era. Like
Right.
like use that as your prompt of, I'm going to make something killer that defines me, that is accessible to the world, and I'm going to experiment with technology that I don't get the chance to experiment with on the daily.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's been pretty fun to watch. I'm more of a designer, and I feel like I'm the maybe the Trojan horse, to use your example, in White Rabbit, because there's we have like 100 employees, and we're 80% dev, right? So I'm like one of a few designers. So yeah, it is interesting. We're seeing how we can really lean into some of those things, um, and I'm trying to figure out ways to help our design partners, because some of them are struggling. Some of them are trying to figure out where the world is kind of shifting. Um, so it's helpful to kind of hear things from your perspective, what you see is working, kind of the trends happening. Because yeah, we're just trying to be the best partner we can for those
Yeah.
agencies. There's a lot of them.
I should introduce you to a couple of these consultants that I was talking about, that's putting together the kind of programming around Like, what's AI mean for your business?
Mm,
And how can we do some workshop discovery sessions and experiment, together. And,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's just a, yeah, good network. I mean, either you adopt it internally and figure out what that curriculum is or offering is, for your clients, or it's the same way of how we've worked together before, where it's like, oh, you need that, you should talk to Adam,
Right.
about
Right.
that, or oh, you need that, like, you're recruiting, scaling the team, talk to Dave, so
Right. Right. For sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, we should talk more about that. I I do think it should be coming from, and sort of we were talking about earlier, like the engineers kind of leading the path. I do feel like we kind of have a little bit of an edge right now
yeah.
if we can be at that bleeding edge ourselves, because we can let them know, hey, you know, yes, you can, like, for example, agencies 5 years ago were still using Photoshop, right? When there was Sketch kind of at that time and now Figma.
Mhm.
And so we were able to advise them and say, hey, let's try these tools. I think this could be a better workflow. I think similarly, we can help guide them so that they can, yeah, just that partnership is a little smoother. So, yeah, it just takes time though, right? You just got to carve out enough time to plan that. But maybe connecting
Yeah.
with a consultant would be a good next step too.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing too. The consultants that I'm thinking of, were affected by layoffs,
Mm,
um, and and unbelievably bright and traditionally extremely employable.
mm,
And for whatever reason, I mean, I tell them it's literally even their own brand, everything they're doing. There's zero red flags.
mm,
Like they're just kind of a victim of the market at the moment.
mm,
But there's two categories of those people. Where there's ones, I think everybody's frustrated and scared, and that's makes total sense. But channel their frustration into um, some channel their frustration into igniting that fire and experimenting with those tools, or experimenting with the concept that they have, and that's what's led them to, like, oh, like, actually,
mm,
i'm I've just gained knowledge and experience that I don't think my mates have,
mm,
because they haven't had the time. And maybe I'm at a certain level in my career,
mm,
especially the design leaders out there, where they see how it can be implemented, what the value is, and then they're designing a brand around it. That's kind of the next step with some conversations I'm having of, like, I'm like, dude, this is really pertinent and timely. Like, I'm like, I think you need to, like, yes, you have a personal site for full-time jobs and stuff like that, but, like, I think you need to brand this and set up a site and sell it, just like
mm.
people were selling design thinking 20 years ago,
Totally.
um
Yeah, I love that. Like kind
you,
of getting lost. Like it's nice hearing what you're saying, because I feel like it um, makes people who are trying or are getting lost a little bit to feel confident just continuing to go forward. It's like when
Mhm.
you get lost, like before we had Google Maps and all that, you'd sometimes like get lost driving around, but then you like next time you're in that area, you're like, oh, I know where this is. You're like, oh, that kind of was fortuitous or whatever.
Yeah,
So it's almost like a trust the process kind of thing, right? Just got to
yeah,
keep poking around and yeah, maybe lean into it with a brand and
yeah.
do something.
Well, and like, I mean, it's classic consulting as well. You go in as the subject expert, matter expert, for that initial brainstorm or think tank or workshop or even ongoing sessions, whatever it might be. And you establish yourself as that voice. And that
Mm,
leads to so many different opportunities internally with just that one client,
mm,
whether it be the services that you and I offer, whether it be a company be like with me saying, like, oh, you should also know this design group over here you know, within this larger company, and you should work with them, and you just mushroom that, or the same way from an engineering standpoint of, like, hey, we've got more, and we'll just keep feeding you. Do you know my partner over there?
mm-hmm.
Establishing yourself as the voice of what's current right now, AI, and and bringing people together internally,
Mm,
that can lead to that leads to full-time opportunities for those individual consultants. It
mm,
almost always does. Now it'll just be a matter of, do they want to commit to that one client, um, or do they have enough demand in their own pipeline where they're like, oh, you know what? Actually, I don't need to go full time anymore. I
mm.
can just stay independent for now.
Right.
Um, Eventually, the market catches up with their expertise, and your stone age again.
Yeah, yeah. But you bring up a really good point there, which is, you know, continue like relying on the community. I think maybe sometimes we get so into like our screens and just that we don't get out there and just meet people and network. I kind of hate the word network because it sounds so transactional, but just having good human to human relationships with people in your space, I think it makes you feel less alone, you know, and
Yeah.
it could lead to a lot of good opportunities as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and the community's been on life support since 2020. And then so many students graduated and haven't necessarily gone into a work environment, an in-person work environment, and and in some ways that's a loss, but that's also me
Hmm.
coming from those environments, so like, if you don't know what you lost, did you lose anything? Like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um but and then I think there's a hibernation, that's gone on, and this is maybe again me projecting, where it's just where I'm at in life, where it's, um I crave the community, but I'm also like, do I still know how to speak, like when I'm face to face with somebody? Like, and I do, but I'm always nervous right before I walk through the door, where I'm
Yeah,
like, do I know English still? Do I
yeah.
have facial expressions? What's my handshake like? And just that awkwardness, and needing to really kind of like jumpstart the outgoingness, and
Yeah.
again, yeah, that's where, you know some of these workshops can come into play, or even what I was talking about, building the recruiting processes and teaching the recruiting playbook. Part of the angle there is that, believe it or not, this is actually some internal team building by proxy, because it's a
Mm,
discussion, and it would be a training that's led by me,
mm,
before it exists as maybe a wiki page, or something that's embracing new and emerging technology and is more fun to look at or recap, but
right.
either way, it would still be delivered initially human to human,
Right.
with maybe a screen in front of her face digitally. So,
Right. Right. Well, it's good to hear that you're leaning into that still. You know, I was listening to a talk with Sam Altman from OpenAI the other day, and he was saying that people in their, I think he was saying like 30s and 40s are using ChatGPT like Google as like a Google replacement, and then people in their like 20s and 30s are using it almost like an advisor and like for copywriting and maybe some life advising on certain things, and then people that are younger are using it for like as an operating system. Like they don't make any major life choices unless they're running all their data through ChatGPT. And I like that. It's kind of exciting, but it's also a little bit scary because I feel like people are going to feel we're going to be so comfortable making these choices. When are we going to ever feel uncomfortable? You know, you got to walk through that door a little bit nervous, a little bit. I mean, I think that emotionally makes you a little bit more awake and like, you know, human. I don't know. Maybe I'm old school in that way, but can't get away from the human to human interaction.
I agree. Um, which again is just like when we go back to like communication degrees, um,
Mm,
or even when we talk about, you know should we go to college? Like, what is the future of education?
Mm.
I mean, now I would say the importance of it. First off, I'm yes, I think everyone should be a continuous lifelong learner. And but now I look at like campus life as maybe being the most benefit of just like, hey, I've got to be, you know, in person, surrounded by people, showing up to a class more times than not. Even if you have the flexibility of joining it digitally and things like that, and
Hmm.
um, which I think is especially great for grad school and things like that, where we're working professionals, and it's like, well, I got a family, I'm just like, I can't just relocate to New York and
Right.
spend 2 years in a program. Like I need to
Yeah.
be able to opt into the class like when I'm opting into it. But for undergrad, um, or even trade schools or any type of schooling, like
Mm.
if the option to be there in person, it's why it's so important.
Right.
Um, Although I'm not a fan of like the work mandates necessarily, like in Seattle, when I think about it, like, as somebody who runs his own thing, I don't have to worry about it. But like on one end, I'm like, it's kind of good for the city of Seattle, like to have people showing up downtown again, So in that
Mm.
sense, I'm for it. I don't have to deal with the traffic,
Mhm.
like, I mean, I do if I'm down there, but I don't have to religiously go. I'm like, if we want the mom and pop sandwich shop or the hair salon or the bike store, like we need the traffic,
Right.
and we need people walking around, and so in that sense, I'm also kind of like, oh, great, they required 3 days a week, or I'm like, oh, they required five, wow. And then of course I hear from those people immediately, where they're like, I'm
Mm.
looking for what's next, like I feel, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not doing 5 days a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the market's not in their favor either.
Yeah.
So,
I know.
so it's like you say you're not, but I can't get you the same pay necessarily, or the bonuses that or RSUs that come with where you're at. And then it's like they're they're in a catch. So
Mm. Yeah. Man, so fascinating. I just want to press the fast forward button and just kind of see how it all plays out. Um, yeah, because we don't want this like dystopian play where you have all these ghost kitchens that just DoorDash you all your food and you don't really interact with. You know what I mean? Like, there's definitely a dark underbelly to the utopia. Um, and I don't know, man. Maybe we just got to create like a little community, a little pocket of Seattle where it's just like everyone with kind of the same beliefs is what we're talking about. It says, all right, dude, I'm going to start a hair salon or I'm going to start a sandwich shop, and just build that. And all the people that sort of believe in that will come out their house and interact, and everyone else can DoorDash everything. I don't know.
a whole new, yeah, a whole new business model,
Yeah.
or philosophy. Yeah, I think the community's craving that kind of um, conversation. It's just a matter of somebody organizing it, and yeah, there's new things popping up, or maybe it's my bird's eye view, just being in interesting conversations with people that are looking for what's next, and getting their
Mm.
story and where they're at in life now, what they're thinking about next, what they're up to, and so um, yeah, sometimes I wish I could just pump it right out of my brain into an LLM and have it make sense of it for me,
Yeah.
and give me some potential strategic next steps forward, to unlock it. And who knows? That's likely coming too. I
Yeah.
don't think I want
Elon,
shit
Elon will
in my brain,
gladly
but
oblige.
yeah. So, but I'm excited for the future. I'm an optimist, and I think a really long term view. I like to think about, you know, humanity hundreds of years or thousands of years into the future. More sci-fi. There's nothing I do with it other than like when I'm in the shit in the moment, or I'm disagreeing with how the world order is or how it's working or things like that. I'm just kind of like, well, we weren't where I thought we were. I've got to accept that. And this clearly needs to go down right now for us to be able to move past it or get past it, even if it feels like history just repeats itself over and over. Like
Mm.
it's just it does in some ways, but it's a completely different era.
Hmm.
And I can like, oh, this type of stuff happened 100 years ago. Yeah, well, they didn't have the technology that we have, so the scenario seems the same, but will it play out exactly the same?
Mm.
Like, no. I don't. I want to spare my son, from certain things, and that I maybe went through, and then I have to remind myself, like, I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s. It's not the 80s and 90s anymore. Like, it's
Right.
so completely different that I'm like, I'm worrying about things that aren't no, that still exist but are in different form. It's
Right.
good to be conscious of them, but it doesn't mean it's going to play out the same. And so,
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to, you're right. It is good to think long term because you can kind of allows you to separate the patterns from just like, the illusions. So, dude, super fun conversation. I feel like we could talk all day. I know you got to run, but thank you, Dave, for coming on and sharing your insights and just having the conversation. It's great talking with you.
thank you so much, Adam. Likewise.
Thank you for listening to the Pixel Perfect podcast, where we go down the rabbit hole on the journey and motivations of creatives and entrepreneurs. Stay tuned for more stories to come. Until next time.